Rot in jail, Mom, while we spend every dollar of your fortune. My son Ethan's voice echoed through the courtroom as the officer snapped the handcuffs around my wrists. The metal was cold, so cold it felt like it burned my skin, but nothing compared to the searing pain in my chest as I saw my own child laughing at me, celebrating my conviction as if it were the best day of his life. Brittany was glued to his arm, wearing that victorious smile she had perfected over the last few months. She leaned in close and whispered something in his ear. Ethan burst into laughter again, louder this time, making sure I could hear him from where I stood, shackled like a common criminal. The judge banged his gavel, demanding order, but it didn't matter anymore. The sentence had been read. 3 years in federal prison for financial fraud and embezzlement, crimes I never committed, crimes they had fabricated with false documents, bought testimonies, and a performance so convincing even the judge had swallowed it whole. Ethan and Brittany rose from their seats. He draped his arm over her shoulders, and together they strode toward the courtroom doors with the arrogance of those who have just won a war. Brittany turned back one last time to look at me, and what I saw in her eyes chilled my blood. It wasn't just satisfaction, it was pure contempt. To her, I was nothing more than an obstacle that had finally been removed from the path. They walked out to celebrate their success. I watched them pass through the double doors, hand in hand, laughing. They were probably already planning how to spend my money. A fancy dinner at a steakhouse, champagne, maybe a trip to the Hamptons. My fortune built over decades of hard work and sacrifice was now in the hands of 2 people who hadn't worked an honest day in their lives. The deputy tugged my arm, forcing me to stand. My knees protested. At 70 years old, every sudden movement is torture. But I forced myself to maintain composure. I wouldn't give them the pleasure of seeing me crumble. Not here. Not in front of all these strangers who had already judged me without knowing the truth. As I was dragged toward the side exit of the courthouse, I heard the murmurs of the crowd. Some looked at me with pity, others with disgust. An older woman who had been a friend of my late husband looked away when our eyes met. The shame was almost heavier than the handcuffs. The hallway to the processing area smelled of cheap disinfectant and desperation. My shoes squeaked against the worn linoleum floor as the officer silently guided me. Other convicted people passed in the opposite direction, some crying, others with lost looks, all sharing that same expression of absolute defeat. But I wasn't defeated, not yet. We reached a small windowless waiting room with peeling cream-colored walls and plastic chairs bolted to the floor. An older correctional officer sat behind a metal desk reviewing papers with the slowness of someone who has done the same thing for decades. He looked up when we entered. Officer Frank Miller read the badge on his chest. His face was weathered, full of deep wrinkles that spoke of a hard life. His eyes were tired, but not cruel. There was a softness in them that contrasted with the surroundings. His uniform was impeccable, carefully pressed, as if that small display of dignity was the only thing keeping him sane in this place. The escorting officer exchanged a few words with Frank, handed him a folder with my documents, and then left. The door closed with a final sound that reverberated in my ears. I was left alone with the old correctional officer. Frank opened the folder and began to review the papers in silence. I sat on one of the plastic chairs, feeling every one of my 70 years in my joints. The handcuffs were still on my wrists, the metal now warm from contact with my skin. I looked down, trying to process everything that had just happened. My own son had sent me to prison. My own son, the baby I had carried in my arms for entire nights when he had colic. The child I had raised alone after his father died of a heart attack when Ethan was just 12. The man I had trusted blindly because he was my blood, my only family. And now he and his wife were outside celebrating, sure that they had won, sure that I was finished. A defenseless old woman who would spend the last years of her life locked behind bars while they enjoyed every dollar I had saved. But they didn't know one thing. Something crucial. Something that would change everything. Frank was still concentrated on the documents, occasionally frowning, turning pages, taking notes in an old spiral notebook. I took advantage of that moment of distraction. Carefully, with the subtlety that only comes from years of being invisible to others. I slipped my right hand toward the inner pocket of my tweed jacket. I had worn that jacket since the start of the trial. It was old, dull gray with slightly worn elbows. Nothing fancy, but it had deep, discreet pockets, and in one of those pockets, folded into a perfect small square, was the paper I had prepared the night before in my temporary cell. The note, my last hope. My fingers trembled as I slowly pulled it out, millimeter by millimeter, making sure not to make any noise that would draw Frank's attention. The paper was warm from my body heat, slightly damp with nervous sweat. I held it between my fingers, feeling its insignificant weight that was at the same time monumental. On that piece of paper torn from a cheap notebook was written a name, a phone number, and a promise that would change everything. Frank closed the folder and leaned back in his chair, which squeaked under his weight. He sighed with the exhaustion of someone who has seen too many ruined lives pass across that desk. He looked at me with something that might have been compassion, or perhaps it was just the automatic reflection of a decent man caught in an indecent system. "Transport will be here in about 20 minutes, Mrs. Dawson. Do you need to use the restroom?" "Water." His voice was kind. That surprised me. I hadn't expected kindness on a day like this, not after everything that had happened. "Water, please," I murmured. My voice came out, broken. I hadn't had anything to drink for hours. Frank nodded and slowly rose from his chair. His knees cracked as he did so, a sound I recognized because my own joints did the same thing every morning. He was an older man, probably a year or two from retirement, with that weight on his shoulders that comes from decades doing a job that no one thanks you for and no one wants. He headed toward a small table in the corner where there was a plastic water pitcher and stacked disposable cups. His back was turned. That was my moment, the only one I would have. With a movement I had mentally rehearsed 100 times, I slid the folded note onto his desk right next to the folder with my documents. I positioned it in such a way that it looked like part of the official papers, but visible enough for him to notice when he returned. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure Frank could hear it from where he was. My pulse hammered in my ears like war drums. The escorting officer was gone. Ethan and Brittany were outside celebrating, and Frank still had his back to me, filling a cup with water that trembled slightly from the weight of his own tired hands. He returned with the cup and extended it to me. I took the cup with my handcuffed hands, the chains jingling slightly, grateful to have something to do with them, something that would hide the trembling I couldn't control. I drank slowly, even though every cell in my body screamed to swallow it all in one gulp. The water was lukewarm with that plastic taste that cheap things have, but it was the most delicious thing I had tasted in days. Frank sat down again, and his gaze immediately fell on the note. I saw the exact moment he registered it. His eyes narrowed, confused. He remained still for a second, looking at the paper as if it had appeared by magic. Then, carefully, as if it might explode, he picked it up between his fingers. I continued to drink water, pretending not to notice anything, but watching him out of the corner of my eye. Every muscle in my body was tense. Everything depended on this moment, on how he reacted. Whether he believed me or thought I was a desperate old woman inventing fantasies. Frank slowly unfolded the note. His hands were large, rough, with scars and calluses that spoke of a youth spent working with them. I read every micro-expression on his face as his eyes scanned the words I had written with a trembling hand the night before. I saw his eyebrows arch. I saw his mouth open slightly, forming a small O of surprise. I saw the exact moment the confusion morphed into absolute shock. The note read, "My son does not know who my new husband is. Call Robert Sterling at this number. Tell him his wife has been arrested. In exchange for this help, you will receive a home and a new life for your family." Below it was a phone number written in black ink, each digit carefully traced so it was perfectly legible. Frank looked up at me. His eyes, previously tired and resigned, were now completely alert. There were questions in them. Hundreds of questions. But above all, there was disbelief. "Robert Sterling," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "The Robert Sterling." I nodded once slowly, holding his gaze without blinking. I needed him to see the truth in my eyes, to understand that it wasn't a joke, that it wasn't the delusion of a desperate convict seeking an impossible miracle. Frank's face visibly palled. He knew that name. Of course he did. Everyone in this state knew that name. Robert Sterling wasn't just a successful businessman. He was a living empire. Construction, real estate, urban development, investments that moved millions of dollars every day, political connections that reached all the way to Washington, D.C. A man whose last name opened doors that for the rest of mortals remained closed and sealed forever. And that man, that titan of business who appeared on the covers of Forbes magazine, was my husband. Frank looked at the note again, then at me, then back at the note. His hands trembled slightly as he held that small piece of paper containing information that could change his life as much as mine. I saw his throat move as he swallowed. I saw his eyes moistened with something that wasn't exactly tears, but the weight of too many crushed hopes over too many years. "Ma'am," he finally murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "If this is true, it is true," I interrupted softly. "Every word." He folded the note carefully, almost reverently, and put it in his shirt pocket. Then he just sat there processing, trying to understand how it was possible that Robert Sterling's wife was sitting in front of him, handcuffed, condemned to 3 years in prison by her own son. And I knew I needed to tell him something, not everything. There wasn't time, but enough for him to understand. For him to know that this wasn't just about money or revenge. It was about justice. It was about the truth. "How did you get here?" Frank asked. And there was genuine sadness in his voice. How could he not know? How could he not protect you? I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the memories flow. I had met Robert 6 months ago. 6 months that had been the happiest of my life after years of absolute solitude. My first husband, Ethan's father, had died 15 years ago. A sudden heart attack that left me a widow at 55 with an adult son who barely visited me and a house too big filled with silence. For all those years, I had resigned myself to loneliness. I had accepted that this was my life now, tending my garden, reading books, watching TV until I fell asleep on the couch. Occasionally, Ethan came to visit, always in a rush, always with excuses about work, about how busy he was. And then Brittany came along, and the visits became even scarcer. But 6 months ago, everything changed. I had gone to an art exhibition downtown. A friend had invited me, insisting I needed to get out more, socialize, live a little. And there, in front of a painting of sunflowers that reminded me of the garden my mother had when I was a child, I saw him, Robert Sterling. At first, I didn't know who he was. I just saw an elegant man with perfectly combed gray hair, an impeccable suit, looking at the same painting with an expression of melancholy that I recognized because it was the same one I felt. The melancholy of someone who has lost something precious and seeks to find it in the most unexpected places. We talked first about the painting, then about art in general, then about our lives. I discovered that he was also a widower. His wife had died 3 years prior from cancer. He told me he came to that gallery every month because it was where he had taken his wife on their first date. I told him about my garden, about how the flowers were the only thing keeping me sane after so many lonely years. We saw each other again the following week and then again and again. Coffee turned into dinners, dinners turned into walks in Central Park, and before I knew it, I had fallen in love like a teenager, feeling butterflies in my stomach every time my phone rang. And it was him. Robert was completely honest with me from the beginning. He told me who he was, what he did, how much money he had, but he asked for something in return. Absolute discretion. He explained that there were people who hated him, unscrupulous competitors who wouldn't hesitate to use any personal information against him. He told me about threats he had received in the past, attempts at extortion, situations where the people he loved had become targets just for being close to him. And he asked me to keep our marriage a secret, at least for a while, until he could ensure I would be protected. Until he could organize the necessary security, until everything was in order. I accepted without hesitation, because after so many lonely years, after so much silence, Robert had given me back something I thought was lost forever. The capacity to feel, to laugh, to wake up every morning with something to smile about. We got married in a private ceremony at his estate outside the city, just the two of us. A justice of the peace and two witnesses Robert had known for decades and trusted completely. It was simple, intimate, perfect. We exchanged simple rings that we wore hidden under our clothes. He kissed my forehead and promised me that soon we could live openly, that soon we wouldn't have to hide. But I made a mistake. A mistake I now understood had been fatal. I didn't tell Ethan anything. I thought it would be temporary. I thought that in a few weeks, maybe a month, Robert would finish organizing everything, and then I could introduce him to my son. I could tell him that his mother had found love again, that I was no longer alone, that someone was taking care of me and making me happy. But before I could do that, everything fell apart. It started 3 months ago. Ethan showed up at my house unannounced, which was unusual because he normally called first. Brittany was with him as always, glued to his side like a shadow. They came in with a strange nervous energy. Ethan looked around as if he were evaluating something. Brittany touched the furniture with her fingertips, making comments about how old everything was, about how I should modernize, renovate, spend a little money to make the house more presentable. They asked about my finances. They wanted to know how much money I had saved, how much the house was worth, if I had investments, insurance, additional properties. I told them I was fine, that I had enough to live comfortably, not to worry about me. But I didn't give them details. Something about the way they asked made me uncomfortable. There was an intensity in their eyes that I didn't like, an anxiety I didn't understand. Ethan insisted. He said he had financial problems, that his business was going through a rough patch, that he needed a loan. Just temporary, he assured me. Just until things got better. Maybe $50,000, maybe a little more. I told him I didn't have that amount immediately available, which was true. Most of my money was in long-term investments, funds I couldn't touch without significant penalties. But I offered to help him with $10,000, all I had in my checking account. Brittany's face changed. I saw the fury flash in her eyes before she could hide it. Ethan looked disappointed, frustrated, but he accepted the $10,000 and promised to pay it back in 3 months. He never did. And a week later, they came back. This time with more urgency. They needed more. $20,000. It was an emergency, an investment opportunity they couldn't miss. They begged me. Ethan took my hands and looked at me with those eyes I had known since he was a baby. And I, God forgive me, gave in again. I withdrew the money from one of my funds, paying the penalty, and gave it to him. That money didn't come back either. And then the more frequent visits started, always asking for more. Always with new excuses, new emergencies. And I started saying no because I was beginning to understand that something wasn't right, that this wasn't normal, that they were using me. That's when everything changed. Ethan arrived one day with documents, contracts, papers filled with legal terms I didn't fully understand. He told me he needed me to sign them, that it was just a formality, a reorganization of family assets to protect me from taxes, from legal complications in case something happened to me. I told him I wanted a lawyer to review them first, and that's when I saw something in my son's eyes that I had never seen before. Something dark. Something dangerous. "Don't you trust me, Mom?" he asked, and there was venom in his voice. "I'm your son, your only family. Are you going to let me down because of your paranoia?" Brittany intervened with that sweet voice she used when she wanted to manipulate. She talked about how hard it had been for Ethan to grow up without a father, about how I was all he had, about how he only wanted to protect me, to make sure my future was secure. And I, God help me, signed. I signed because he was my son. Because despite everything, despite the distance that had grown between us, despite the fact that Brittany had changed him in ways I didn't like, he was still my boy. The baby I had carried, the child I had raised alone after his father died. I couldn't believe he would hurt me, but I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I received the notification. A lawsuit. My own son was suing me for fraud, for misappropriation of family funds, for forgery. The same documents I had signed out of trust were now being used as evidence against me. Ethan had manipulated everything. He had altered the papers after I signed them. He had created a story where I had stolen money from joint accounts we supposedly had, where I had forged his signature on transactions, where I had acted as a criminal who took advantage of her own son's trust. I hired a lawyer, the best I could afford with what I had left. But Ethan had been meticulous. He had false witnesses, bank documents that looked legitimate, emails I supposedly sent even though I never wrote them. It was a perfect conspiracy. And the worst part was that Robert knew nothing. He was out of the country the whole time managing business in Europe. We talked on the phone. But I didn't want to worry him with my problems. I thought I could solve it alone. I thought the truth would come out and everything would be fine. How stupid I was. The trial was a nightmare. My lawyer did what he could, but the evidence against me was overwhelming. Ethan cried on the stand, acting like the devastated son betrayed by his own mother. Brittany testified with fake tears rolling down her cheeks, talking about how I had always been controlling with money, about how I had threatened to disinherit Ethan if he didn't do what I wanted. And the jury bought it all. Guilty. 3 years in prison. Robert returned to the country the day before the sentencing, but by then it was too late. I didn't have time to contact him, to explain, to ask for help. I was quickly moved from the courtroom to the processing room. And now I was here telling fragments of this nightmare to a correctional officer who held in his pocket the only hope I had left. "My son thinks he won," I told Frank, and my voice was stronger now, firmer. "He and his wife believe they are going to take all my money, my house, everything I built over the years, but they don't know Robert exists. They don't know he's going to find out what they did. And when he does," I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't need to. Frank understood. He took the note out of his pocket again and read it a third time, as if he needed to make sure the words were still the same. "A house," he murmured. "You can really give me a house. Robert can." I corrected him. "And he will. He is a man of his word. If you tell him I asked for this, if you explain the situation, he will reward you. He has properties all over the state, houses he maintains for investment. He can give you one. He can give you more than that. He can change your life." Frank closed his eyes. I saw a single tear roll down his weathered cheek. When he opened them again, he had made a decision. "I have a daughter," he said softly. "Livia. She's 26 with 2 young kids. My son-in-law abandoned them last year, left without a trace. She lives with me and my wife in a 2-bedroom apartment we can barely afford. The kids sleep in the living room. My wife is sick. She needs expensive medication that our insurance doesn't fully cover. I work double shifts just to keep our heads above water." His voice broke. "If you're telling me the truth, if there's even a chance that this is real, I'll make that call because my family needs a miracle as much as you do. I held his gaze. Call him. Frank took his cell phone out of his desk drawer. It was an old model with a scratched screen and a case worn from use. His hands trembled as he dialed the number I had written on the note. I saw him hesitate for a second, his finger suspended over the call button, as if in that last moment the reality of what he was doing hit him with full force. But then he pressed the button. The sound of the phone dialing filled the small room. 1, 2, 3 rings. I held my breath. It had been 3 days since I last spoke to Robert. 3 days that felt like an eternity. He had called the night before the trial, but I was so distraught, so consumed by fear that I could barely hold a coherent conversation. I told him everything was fine, that I was just tired, that I loved him, and we would talk soon. I lied. And now I was paying the price for that lie. The 4th ring, the 5th. Frank looked at me with worry, as if he thought no one would answer, that this was a cruel fantasy of a desperate woman. But then the line connected. Sterling. Robert's voice was crisp, professional. It was his business tone, the one he used when he was in the middle of important meetings or delicate negotiations. Frank almost dropped the phone. He cleared his throat, trying to find his voice. Mr. Sterling, My name is Frank Miller. I'm a correctional officer at the County Justice Center. I'm calling because, he paused, looking at me for confirmation. I nodded. Because your wife asked me to contact you. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute, so complete that for a moment I thought the call had been cut off, but then I heard Robert's breathing faster and faster, more intense. Cecilia. His voice had completely changed. He was no longer the cold, calculating businessman. He was a scared man. What happened to Cecilia? Mr. Miller, she was arrested, convicted. She's here with me now, waiting for transport to the state prison. She gave me this number and asked me to call you. She says you are her husband. Arrested? The word came out like a roar. Why the hell did no one inform me? When did this happen? Where is she now? Frank passed the phone to me. My handcuffed hands made it difficult to hold, but I managed. When I heard Robert's voice, so familiar, so loved, something inside me broke. The tears I had been holding back for days, for weeks, finally welled up. Robert! My voice was barely a choked whisper. Robert, I'm so sorry. I should have told you. I should have told you everything from the start. Cecilia, my love, what is going on? Speak slowly. Where are you? Who arrested you? Why? Ethan, I said, and my son's name came out like poison from my lips. He accused me of fraud, forged documents, lied in court. They sentenced me to 3 years. Robert, 3 years. Silence again. But this time it was different. It was the calm before the storm. When Robert spoke again, his voice was dangerously calm, controlled. But I could hear the fury boiling just beneath the surface. Your son did this. Your own son sent you to prison. He and his wife, Brittany, they planned everything. They wanted my money, my house. They thought I was alone, that no one would protect me. They don't know you exist, Robert. They don't know anything about us. Where exactly are you right now? At the County Justice Center, processing room. They're going to transfer me in less than 15 minutes. They are not transferring you anywhere, Robert said, and his tone left no room for discussion. Put the officer back on the phone. I handed the phone back to Frank. He took it with trembling hands and put it to his ear. Mr. Sterling. Robert's voice was so loud I could hear it from where I was sitting. Listen to me very carefully. My wife is not getting on that transport. She is going to stay exactly where she is until I arrive with my legal team. Do you understand me, sir? I don't have the authority to stop a scheduled transfer. There are protocols, procedures that I'm going to tell you something, Mr. Miller. In less than 5 minutes, Judge Hamilton Richarditz is going to receive an emergency call requesting a temporary suspension of the sentence based on procedural irregularities. In less than 10 minutes, you will have a signed order stopping any transfer of prisoner Cecilia Dawson until the case is reviewed. And if anything happens to my wife before I get there, if anyone moves her a single inch from where she is now, I will personally ensure that every person involved in this disaster loses their job and faces legal consequences. Have I been clear enough? Frank had completely palled. He nodded even though Robert couldn't see him. Yes, sir. Perfectly clear. Good. Now put my wife back on. Frank returned the phone to me almost reverently. Robert, I whispered. I didn't know what else to do. I'm so sorry for not telling you anything before, for not involving you from the beginning. Don't apologize. His voice softened. None of this is your fault. Do you hear me? None of it. But I need you to listen carefully. I'm gonna fix this. I'm gonna get you out of there. And your son, that scoundrel who dares to call himself your family, is going to pay for every second of suffering he caused you. He's my son, Robert. Despite everything, he's still my son. He stopped being your son the moment he decided to betray you like this. Robert paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was charged with a dark promise. But don't worry about that now. Focus on staying safe. Don't talk to anyone. Don't sign anything. Don't accept anything they offer you. My team will be there in less than an hour. The best criminal defense attorney in the state, Morris Flores, is already on his way. He will take care of everything. And Frank? I asked, looking at the officer who had made this call possible. I promised you would help him. He has a family that needs support. Officer Miller is going to receive everything you promised him and more, Robert said. After I finish with all this, he and his family will never have to worry about money again. You have my word. Frank, who had been listening, closed his eyes and an expression of absolute relief crossed his face. It was as if a decade's-long weight had been lifted from his shoulders in a single instant. I love you, I told Robert, feeling that the words were insufficient to express what I felt. Thank you for not abandoning me. I would never abandon you, he replied. We are a family now, Cecilia, and family protects itself. Stay there. Don't move. I'm coming. The call ended. I handed the phone back to Frank, and we sat in silence, processing what had just happened. The clock on the wall marked the passing of the minutes with a tick-tock that seemed unbearably slow. Every second was a torture of anticipation. 7 minutes later, the phone on Frank's desk rang. He answered immediately. Miller, he said, and then his face transformed. Yes, sir. Yes, understood. Immediately, he hung up and looked at me with a mixture of astonishment and disbelief. Judge Richards just issued a temporary stay of your transfer. You have to stay here until your legal representation arrives. He was silent for a moment. Mrs. Dawson, I don't know who you really are, but your husband just moved mountains in less than 10 minutes. I smiled for the first time in days, in weeks, because finally, after all the pain, all the betrayal, all the injustice, something was going right. Robert was coming. And when Robert Sterling decided to fix something, nothing and no one stood in his way. But while we waited, as time crawled by with painful slowness, I couldn't stop thinking about Ethan. Where was he right now? Probably at some expensive restaurant, toasting with champagne, laughing with Brittany about how easy it had been to fool me. They were probably already making plans about how to spend my money, about what to buy first, about how to divide the fortune they thought belonged to them. They had no idea of the storm heading their way. They had no idea that the most powerful man in the state was about to unleash all his power against them. They had no idea that they had made the biggest mistake of their lives by underestimating a 70-year-old woman who had survived widowhood, loneliness, and loss, only to find love again and marry a man who would move heaven and earth to protect what he loved. 40 minutes later, the processing room door burst open. A man entered like a hurricane. He was tall, about 50 years old. in a perfectly cut dark suit and a leather briefcase that screamed money. His black hair was slicked back. His dark eyes were sharp and intelligent, and he walked with the confidence of someone who had never lost a case in his life. "Morris Flores," he introduced himself, extending his hand first to me and then to Frank. "I am Mrs. Dawson's lawyer, and we are leaving here right now." Behind him entered two assistants carrying more papers, more documents, everything necessary to begin dismantling the FAR Ethan had built. And behind them, finally, entered Robert. My Robert. He looked exactly as I remembered him, but there was something different in his eyes, an intensity I had never seen before, a controlled fury that made the air around him seem to vibrate with dangerous energy. He was 65, but at that moment, he looked like a warrior ready for battle. Our eyes met across the room. He crossed the space between us in 3 long steps, knelt in front of me, uncaring that his 1,000 suit touched the dirty floor, and took my handcuffed hands in his. "My love," he whispered, and his voice was broken. "Forgive me for not being here when you needed me." "You're here now," I said, tears running freely down my cheeks. "That's all that matters." Robert stood up and turned to Morris. "I want those handcuffs off her now. I want every document reviewed. I want every irregularity exposed. And I want the name of every person involved in this conspiracy against my wife." Morris smiled. It was the smile of a predator who had found its prey. "We're already on it, Mr. Sterling. I guarantee that by this time tomorrow, your wife will be free, and those responsible will be answering some very uncomfortable questions." Robert looked at Frank, who had stood up and was standing next to his desk watching everything with an expression of absolute astonishment. "Mr. Miller," Robert said, walking toward him. "My wife told me you made this call possible, that you risked your position to help her. I want you to know that will not be forgotten." Frank swallowed. She needed help. That's all. You did more than help. You gave her hope when she had none, and I always pay my debts." Robert took out his phone and dialed a number. "Enrique, it's me. I need you to prepare the house in Sun Valley Hills. Yes, the 4-bedroom with the big yard. It's going to be for the Miller family. I want the deed ready for tomorrow and make sure it is fully furnished and ready to move into immediately." Frank staggered. He had to grab the desk to keep from falling. "Mr. Sterling, I can't. That's too much. It's not enough." Robert interrupted him. "But it's a start." The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of legal activity that I could barely process. Morris Flores worked like a machine, dissecting every document in the case, finding irregularities that my previous attorney hadn't even thought to look for. It turned out Ethan had made mistakes. Small ones, but enough. Dates that didn't match, signatures that were slightly off, testimonies with inconsistencies that no one had questioned because everyone assumed a mother would never be betrayed in that way by her own son. Robert took me out of that processing room that same night, not directly home. That would have been impossible with the judicial order still in effect, but to house arrest at one of his properties while the emergency appeal was processed. The house was a mansion on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens and a high wall that guaranteed absolute privacy. There was security at every corner, men in dark suits and earpieces guarding every entrance, every exit. Robert was taking no chances. He explained that once Ethan found out what was happening, he might try anything to stop it, and Robert wanted to be prepared for any eventuality. That first night in the mansion, after the lawyers left and we were finally alone, Robert held me for hours. He didn't say much. He just held me while I cried. Years of pent-up pain. The pain of having been betrayed by my own blood. The pain of having been so blind, so trusting, so foolish. "You are not foolish," Robert said when I finally expressed those thoughts aloud. "You are a mother who loved her son. There is nothing foolish about that." I loved him. I whispered against his chest. God help me. I still love him, and that kills me. I know. Robert pulled me away slightly so he could look into my eyes. And that's why we are going to do this the right way. Not for revenge, although God knows it's deserved, but for justice for the truth, so everyone knows you did nothing wrong. The next morning, Morris arrived with news. He had found something big. One of the witnesses who had testified against me in the trial, an accountant who had supposedly reviewed my finances and found irregularities, was willing to talk, to tell the truth, because it turned out Ethan hadn't paid him what he promised. And now the accountant was furious and scared of being dragged down too when everything unraveled. His name was William Perry, a nervous man in his 40s, looking like someone who hadn't slept well in weeks. Maurice brought him to the mansion that afternoon, accompanied by a notary and recording equipment. We were going to document every word. William could barely look me in the eyes as he sat in the living room that Robert had converted into a makeshift legal operations center. There were papers everywhere, open laptops, phones ringing constantly. It was as if an entire law firm had been transplanted into this house. Mrs. Dawson, William began, his voice trembling. I didn't know it would go this far. You have to believe me. When Ethan hired me, he told me he just needed some documents reviewed, some numbers adjusted for a tax matter. He paid me $5,000 up front and promised another $20,000 when everything was over. And what exactly did you do? Morris asked, his voice calm, but with a dangerous edge. I fabricated financial reports. I created transactions that never existed. I made it look like Mrs. Dawson had been moving large sums of money from joint accounts with Ethan into personal accounts, but none of that was real. It was all fabricated on my computer. And the withdrawals I supposedly made? I asked, feeling bile rise in my throat. The $150,000 that the prosecutor said I stole from my own son. They never existed, William admitted, tears now running down his face. Ethan gave me access to old bank accounts that were already closed. I altered the statements to show recent activity. I changed dates. I invented transaction numbers. Anyone with forensic accounting knowledge would have detected the fraud in minutes. But your lawyer never requested an independent audit. Because I couldn't afford it, I said bitterly. Ethan made sure to freeze my assets so fast I barely had money for the public defender. Maurice was furiously taking notes. Robert, who had been listening from a corner of the room with his arms crossed, finally spoke. Was Brittany involved in this? Ethan's wife? William nodded vigorously. She was the one who initially contacted me. Ethan didn't even know my name at first. Brittany had been planning this for months, maybe years. She showed me documents. She explained exactly what she needed me to do. It was her plan from the start. Ethan just followed her orders. That hit me harder than I expected. A part of me had wanted to believe my son was also a victim here, that Brittany had manipulated him, poisoned his mind against me. But hearing that he had actively participated, that he had followed her orders so willingly, was like a direct stab. Why are you confessing this now? Robert asked. Why risk it? Because Ethan threatened me, William said, his voice breaking. After the trial, when I went to collect the rest of my payment, he laughed in my face. He told me I would never see that money. And then he told me that if I talked to anyone about what I had done, he would make sure I was the only one who ended up in prison, that he had documents implicating me as the mastermind behind everything, that he was just an innocent victim I had tricked. And those documents probably exist, Morris said. Ethan is smarter than we thought. He created layers of protection for himself. But now we have this. Robert pointed to the camera that had recorded every word. We have his confession. We have proof of criminal conspiracy. And with this, we can start tearing down everything they built. William's statement was just the beginning. Over the next few days, Maurice and his team worked tirelessly to track every move Ethan and Brittany had made in the last 6 months. They discovered new bank accounts opened right after my arrest, large transfers scheduled to execute the day after I was sent to prison. They had even already contacted a real estate agent to put my house up for sale. My house, the place where I had raised Ethan, where his father had died, where every corner held a memory of 30 years of family life, and they were going to sell it without a second thought, without an ounce of remorse. But what shattered me the most was what we discovered a week after my temporary release. It turned out Ethan had a son from a previous marriage he had kept secret, an 8-year-old boy named Matthew who lived with his mother in another city. And Brittany, in her infinite cruelty, had been feeding that child lies about me. She had told Matthew that his grandmother was a criminal, a thief, a bad woman who had tried to steal his dad's money, that because of me, his dad couldn't send them as much money as before, that I was the reason he couldn't have the things he wanted. We discovered this when Matthew's mother, a woman named Tatiana Reynolds, contacted us directly. She had seen the news because, yes, by this point the press had begun covering the story. Robert Sterling's wife, unjustly jailed by her own son, was the kind of scandal that sold papers. Tatiana came to see us, bringing Matthew with her. He was a beautiful boy with Ethan's eyes, but with a sweetness on his face that my son had lost a long time ago. When he saw me, Matthew hid behind his mother, scared as if I were a monster. "I'm so sorry," Tatiana said, her eyes full of tears. "I didn't know Brittany was telling him those things. Ethan barely visits us, and when he does, she's always with him, controlling every conversation. I thought she was just being protective, but now I understand she was manipulating everything." I knelt in front of Matthew, keeping my distance so as not to scare him more. "Hello, Matthew. My name is Cecilia. I'm your grandmother. I know they told you bad things about me, but none of that is true. I would never hurt your dad. I love him even now, even after everything." Matthew looked at me with those big, innocent eyes. "You're not bad." "No, honey, I'm not." "Then why does Dad say you are?" I didn't have an answer for that. How do you explain to an 8-year-old child that his father is a liar, that his father conspired to send his own mother to prison for money? I couldn't. I wasn't going to destroy the image he had of Ethan, no matter what my son had done to me. "Sometimes adults make mistakes," I finally said. "Big mistakes. And your dad made a very big one. But that doesn't mean he doesn't love you." "Okay." Matthew nodded slowly, still unsure but less scared. Tatiana put her hand on my shoulder, squeezing gently. "Ethan never told me you were so kind," she said. "He never talked about you at all. In fact, I understand why now." That night, after Tatiana and Matthew left, I sat with Robert in the mansion's garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky in oranges and pinks. It was beautiful, peaceful, completely at odds with the storm brewing inside me. "You have a grandson," Robert said softly. "A grandson you didn't even know existed." "Ethan hid him from me for years," I replied, feeling a new wave of betrayal. "I have a grandson, and he decided I didn't deserve to know him." "What kind of person does that?" "The kind of person who is capable of sending his mother to prison for money." Robert took my hand. "But now you know him, and if Tatiana agrees, you can be part of Matthew's life. You can be the grandmother he deserves." "After we finish with this," I said, feeling something harden inside me. "After Ethan and Brittany pay for what they did, then I can think about being a grandmother." Robert smiled, but there was no warmth in that smile. It was the smile of a man who knew justice was near. "Speaking of that, Morris has news. The prosecutor reviewed the new evidence. They are dropping all charges against you tomorrow in a special hearing, and they are issuing arrest warrants for Ethan, Brittany, and William for conspiracy, fraud, and perjury." I gasped. "Tomorrow. Tomorrow." Robert confirmed. "But she..." "And there's Chabelle. It turns out Ethan organized an event for tomorrow night, a celebration at a private club. He invited friends, family, business partners. He was going to officially announce that he had inherited your fortune that he was ready to invest in new businesses. Basically, he was going to celebrate his victory over you in front of everyone. The irony was almost too perfect. "What are you thinking?" I asked, seeing the calculating expression on Robert's face. "I'm thinking," he said slowly, "that it would be a shame if he missed his own celebration party." The hearing the next day was quick and devastatingly effective. Judge Richards, the same one who had presided over my original trial, looked visibly uncomfortable as he reviewed the new evidence presented by Morris. William Perry's recorded confession, the forensic analyses of the falsified documents, the inconsistencies in the testimonies that no one had questioned because they seemed too elaborate to be lies. The prosecutor, a middle-aged man named Henry Flores, Morris's younger brother, stood up and formally declared that the state was dropping all charges against Cecilia Dawson, that there had been a monumental miscarriage of justice, that they had been fooled by a meticulously planned criminal conspiracy. "Mrs. Dawson," Judge Richard said, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I heard something close to respect in the voice of someone related to the justice system. "On behalf of this court, I offer my sincerest apologies. What was done to you is inexcusable, and I assure you that those responsible will face the full weight of the law." I nodded, unable to speak. Tears ran freely down my cheeks, but this time they were not tears of pain. They were of relief, of justice, of vindication. After weeks of being treated like a criminal, of being looked at with contempt, of carrying the shame of an unjust conviction, someone in authority was finally saying the words I needed to hear. I was not guilty. The judge banged his gavel. "Arrest warrants are issued for Ethan Dawson, Brittany Dawson, and William Perry on charges of criminal conspiracy, fraud, forgery, and perjury. Officers are authorized to proceed immediately." Robert, sitting next to me, squeezed my hand. Morris closed his briefcase with a satisfying click. We had won the first battle. But the war wasn't over yet, because winning in court was one thing. Making Ethan and Brittany fully understand what they had lost, that was something else entirely. We left the court surrounded by security. Reporters swarmed us, shouting questions, pushing each other to get a photo, a comment, anything. Robert shielded me with his body as we made our way to the waiting car. I didn't say anything to the press. Not yet. There would be time for public statements later. For now, I just wanted to breathe. I just wanted to process that I was finally free. Back at the mansion, Robert led me to the master suite. He had bought me new clothes, all in my exact size, elegant dresses, comfortable but beautiful shoes, everything a woman would need to feel human again after weeks of humiliation. He had prepared a bath with aromatic salts, candles, soft music. "Rest," he told me, kissing my forehead. "You have to be ready for tonight." Tonight, Ethan's celebration. The event where he planned to boast of his victory, of the fortune he had stolen, of the bright future he thought awaited him. He had no idea that at that moment arrest warrants with his name on them were being processed, that police officers were preparing to execute them, that his perfect world was about to crumble in front of everyone. Robert had arranged things so that the arrests would not take place until after the event. He wanted Ethan to have his imagined moment of glory. He wanted him to celebrate, to toast, to feel invincible because the fall would be much harder from that height, and I was going to be there to see it. I sank into the bath, letting the hot water relax muscles I had kept tense for too long. I closed my eyes and thought about everything that had happened, how I had gotten to this point. A 70-year-old woman who had lost everything only to discover she had more strength than she ever imagined, more resources, more allies, and a husband who would move heaven and earth to protect her. After the bath, I found a dress laid out on the bed. It was elegant, but not flashy. Deep burgundy, long-sleeved, falling just below the knees. Perfect for a woman my age, sophisticated without trying to look younger than I was. It was accompanied by a simple pearl necklace and low-heeled shoes I knew I could wear for hours without pain. I dressed slowly, taking my time. I carefully applied makeup, covering the marks of the past few weeks, the dark circles, the pilar, the traces of stress that had aged my face more than any calendar year could do. When I finished, I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. It was me, but transformed. I was no longer the broken, humiliated prisoner. I was Cecilia Sterling, wife of one of the most powerful men in the state. A woman who had faced betrayal and come out the other side, not just surviving, but ready for battle. Robert entered the room already dressed in an impeccable suit. When he saw me, he stopped dead. "You are beautiful," he said, and there was genuine astonishment in his voice. "Absolutely beautiful. I feel like a warrior preparing for battle," I admitted. "Well," Robert smiled, offering me his arm. "That is exactly what you are." The private club where Ethan had organized his celebration was in the heart of the city. It was an exclusive place, one of those where you need connections just to get a reservation. Of course, Robert was a founding member. He had invested in the place when it opened 10 years ago, which meant we had full access. No questions asked, no problems. We arrived just as the event was at its peak. Cars were lined up at the entrance, valet rushing back and forth. Well-dressed people were coming and going, laughing, drinking champagne even before entering the building. It was the kind of scene that screamed success. Money. Celebration. Robert instructed the chauffeur to park in a discreet location where we could see the entrance but not be easily seen ourselves. He wanted to know exactly who was inside before making our grand entrance. He wanted the perfect moment. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Robert asked, taking my hand. "We can still leave. Let the police handle everything. You don't have to face him this way." I looked toward the building, toward the bright lights, toward the laughter I could hear even from here. Somewhere in there was Ethan, my son, the child I had carried, fed, raised, the man who had betrayed me in the cruelest way possible. "I need to do this," I said firmly. "I need him to see me. I need him to know he didn't win, that he was never going to win." Robert nodded. He knew there was no changing my mind. He took out his phone and sent a quick message. Seconds later, he received a reply. "Maurice is inside," he reported. "Says Ethan is in the center of everything showing off. Brittany is by his side wearing a dress that probably cost what most people earn in a month. They are serving $500 a bottle champagne. Your money, of course. Of course. My money paying for their fake celebration." The irony was almost poetic. "There's more," Robert continued, reading another message. "Ethan just made an announcement. Says he's launching a new investment firm that he has $2 million in seed capital and is looking for partners." He was literally trying to recruit investors using my stolen fortune. $2 million. I didn't even have that much liquid money. There were savings, investments, properties, but not $2 million in cash, which meant he was lying again, making promises he couldn't keep, deceiving more people, expanding his web of lies. "It's time," I said, opening the car door before he could change his mind. Robert got out on his side and came to my side, offering me his arm. Together we walked toward the entrance. The valet immediately recognized us, his eyes widening in surprise. "Mr. Sterling, Mrs. Sterling, good evening. We didn't know you were attending this event." "It's a surprise," Robert said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We prefer it to remain that way for the moment." The valet nodded quickly and opened the door for us. The music hit us first, followed by the sound of laughter, overlapping conversations, the clinking of glasses. The ballroom was huge, decorated with excessive elegance. Lights hung from the ceiling, tables covered with immaculate white cloths, a full bar on one side and a dance floor on the other. And in the center of everything, surrounded by people, was Ethan. My son looked different from the last time I had seen him in court. He was wearing a new, clearly expensive suit. His hair was perfectly styled. He held a glass of champagne in one hand and gesticulated animatedly with the other as he told some story that made those around him laugh. Brittany was stuck to his side as always. Her dress was bright red, tight-fitting, with a neckline that left little to the imagination. Jewelry hung from her neck and wrists, probably also bought with my money. She smiled with that satisfied look she had perfected, the smile of someone who had gotten exactly what she wanted. We stood at the entrance, observing. No one had noticed us yet. Everyone's attention was focused on Ethan, on his celebration, on his moment of glory. Morris appeared by our side, emerging from the crowd. "Everything is ready," he whispered. "The police are outside waiting for the signal. The moment you say the word, they come in and make the arrests." "Not yet," I replied. "I want him to see me first." Robert guided me further into the room. Some guests began to notice our presence. I saw their expressions change from confusion to recognition to absolute shock. Whispers began to spread like fire. "Robert Sterling is here, and the woman next to him, the woman who was supposed to be in prison, is also here." The murmuring grew louder. More people turned to look at us. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, and finally, inevitably, Ethan felt the change in the atmosphere. He stopped talking and looked around, trying to understand what had captured everyone's attention. His eyes met mine across the room. I saw the exact moment his brain processed what he was seeing. I saw the color drain from his face. I saw the champagne glass almost fall from his hand. I saw his mouth open in a small O of shock and disbelief. Brittany followed his gaze, and when she saw me, her face transformed into a mask of pure horror. The music was still playing, but now no one was dancing. Everyone was looking at us, at me. Standing at the entrance in my elegant dress and my recovered composure. At Robert by my side with his imposing presence filling the room, and at Ethan and Brittany in the center of everything, looking as if they had just seen a ghost. Because to them, that was exactly what I was. A ghost from the past. They had tried to bury a woman who was supposed to be locked up, defeated, destroyed. And instead, here I was, free, powerful, and accompanied by the most influential man in the state. Ethan put his glass down on the nearest table with trembling hands. Brittany clung to his arm, her knuckles white from the force of her grip. I saw them exchange quick glances, panic growing on both their faces as they tried to understand how this was possible. What had gone wrong? How their perfect plan had failed? I started walking toward them. Robert stayed by my side, his presence a silent promise of protection. Morris followed a few steps behind. The crowd parted as we walked, creating a path directly to the center of the room toward my son and his wife. The steps seemed eternal. Each one was a declaration. Each one said, "I survived." Each one said, "You didn't win." Each one said, "It's your turn to fall." We finally arrived in front of them. Ethan opened his mouth, tried to say something, but no sound came out. Brittany looked at him desperately, as if hoping he would fix this somehow, that he would find the magic words that would make this nightmare disappear. The silence in the room was absolute now. Even the music had been stopped by someone. All eyes were on us, waiting, wondering what would come next. "Hello, Ethan," I finally said, my voice calm, controlled, stronger than I had felt in years. "What a nice celebration. Too bad it won't end the way you expected." Ethan finally found his voice, although it came out trembling and broken. "Mom, what are you doing here? You were supposed to—" "You shouldn't be in prison. I finished for him." "Yes, I know." "I was supposed to be locked up for 3 years while you and your charming wife enjoyed my money. While you celebrated your victory. While you erased me from your lives as if I had never existed." Brittany tried to regain her composure. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, trying to project that false confidence she used as armor. "I don't know what you're talking about. This is a private event. You weren't invited. You should leave before we call security." Robert let out a short, Humorless laugh. Security? Please try it. This club is 40% owned by me. The security here answers to me before anyone else. Brittany's face pad further. Her eyes darted back and forth, looking for an exit, a way to escape this situation she clearly hadn't anticipated. "Who the hell are you?" Ethan demanded, looking at Robert with a mixture of fear and defiance. "What do you have to do with all this?" "I am Robert Sterling," my husband said. And I saw recognition hit Ethan like a physical punch. "And I'm your mother's husband. The man you never bothered to ask about. The man whose existence would have made you reconsider every one of your stupid plans." The murmurs in the room turned into audible exclamations. Everyone knew Robert Sterling's name. Everyone knew what that meant. And now everyone understood that Ethan Dawson had made the biggest mistake of his life by betraying that man's wife. "It's not possible," Ethan whispered. But his voice lacked conviction. "You're not married. You never said anything about starting over after years of widowhood." "You're right. I didn't tell you," I interrupted. "Because you barely visited me, Ethan. Because when you did, you only came to ask for money. Because you stopped being my son long before you decided to send me to prison." The tears threatened to fall, but I forced myself to hold them back. Not here, not in front of him. I had already cried enough for this man who was once my baby. Morris stepped forward, taking out his phone. "Mr. Dawson, Mrs. Dawson, I should inform you that this morning in a special hearing, all charges against Cecilia Dawson were dropped. Judge Richard issued arrest warrants against the two of you and William Perry for criminal conspiracy, fraud, forgery, and perjury." Brittany gasped. Her hand flew to her throat as if she couldn't breathe. Ethan staggered, having to grab the table behind him to keep from falling. "That's ridiculous," he gasped. "They can't. They don't have proof of we have William Perry's full confession," Morris continued, his voice cold and professional. "Video recorded under oath with a notary present. He explained in detail how you hired him to falsify financial documents, how you created non-existent transactions, how you manipulated everything to incriminate an innocent woman." "He's lying!" Brittany screamed, her composure finally crumbling. "He's framing us to save himself. No one is going to believe the word of a corrupt accountant over ours." "We also have forensic analysis," Morris added. "Experts examined every document presented in the original trial. They discovered digital alterations, manipulated dates, forged signatures. We have technical evidence that cannot be refuted by convenient stories." Ethan began to back away, dragging Brittany with him. His eyes desperately searched for the exits of the room. But Robert had been meticulous. There were security guards blocking every door, discreet but impossible to pass. "And there's more," I continued, taking one step closer to my son. "We discovered the bank accounts you opened immediately after my arrest. We saw the scheduled transfers. We found the emails with the real estate agent about selling my house. We have every piece of evidence that shows exactly what you planned to do once I was out of the way." "We also spoke with Tatiana," Robert added. "Matthew's mother, your son Ethan, the grandson you hid from your mother for years. She told us how Brittany has been filling the boy's head with lies about Cecilia, how you tried to poison an innocent child against his own grandmother." That was the last straw for me to think of Matthew. That beautiful, innocent child being used as a pawn in Britain's cruel game filled me with a rage I didn't know I could feel. "How could you?" I asked Ethan, my voice finally breaking. "How could you do all this? I'm your mother. I gave you everything. I sacrificed everything for you after your father died. I worked 2 jobs so you could go to a good school. I stayed up all night when you were sick. I defended you when no one else would. And this is how you repay me. Destroying my life for money you didn't even desperately need." "You were always controlling," Ethan spat out suddenly, his fear transforming into defensive rage. "Always wanting to know everything, control everything. You never let me live my own life. This money was mine by right. I'm your only son. It should have been mine from the start. Then you should have asked for it like a civilized adult, Robert said, instead of conspiring like a cowardly criminal. Morris lifted his phone and typed a quick message. Seconds later, the ballroom doors opened. Police officers entered, moving with purpose toward the center of the room, toward where Ethan and Brittany were trapped. "Ethan Dorson, Brittany Dawson," one of the officers announced. "You are under arrest on charges of criminal conspiracy, fraud, forgery, and perjury. You have the right to remain silent." The rest was lost in the chaos that erupted. Brittany began screaming, trying to pull away as the officer tried to handcuff her. Ethan simply stood there, motionless, as if his brain had finally accepted that this was real, that there was no escape, that he had completely lost. The guests watched in horror and fascination. Some took out their phones, recording everything. This would be on the news in minutes on social media everywhere. The public humiliating fall of Ethan Dawson, the man who had tried to destroy his own mother. As the officers dragged them toward the exit, Ethan looked at me one last time. I waited to see remorse. I waited to see something that indicated the son I knew was still in there somewhere. But all I saw was hatred, pure, undiluted hatred. And in that moment, I understood that the son I loved had died a long time ago, that the man in front of me was a stranger who shared my blood, but none of my values. "Goodbye, Ethan," I whispered as he disappeared through the doors. The days after the arrest were a media whirlwind I hadn't expected. My face was on every newspaper, every newscast. The story had all the elements the press loves: family betrayal, a dramatic twist, a clear villain, and a victim who became a victor. But what the reporters didn't know, what no one knew yet, was that this was far from over. 3 days after Ethan and Brittany were arrested, Morales arrived at the mansion with news that chilled my blood. He had discovered something while reviewing more documents, something none of us had anticipated. "Mrs. Sterling," he said, his expression grave as he spread papers on the dining room table, "we found something else. Something that completely changes the situation." Robert and I leaned in to see the documents. They were deeds, legal papers full of jargon I could barely understand. But there was one name I immediately recognized: my house. The house where I had lived for 30 years. "What is this?" I asked, feeling a knot form in my stomach. "Ethan didn't just plan to sell your house after you went to prison," Morris explained. "He already sold it. Well, technically transferred it into Britton's name. 2 weeks ago, before the final trial, he forged your signature on property transfer documents. The house is legally no longer yours." The room seemed to tilt. Robert held my arm, steadying me. "How is that possible?" Robert asked, his voice dangerously calm. "How could he transfer a property without her being present?" "He bribed a corrupt notary," Morris replied. "The same one who helped with the other false documents. We have her name, Ramona Perry, William's sister. She authenticated the false signature, dated the documents correctly, made it all look completely legal." "My house," I whispered, feeling tears burn my eyes. "The house where I raised Ethan, where my husband died, where I have 30 years of memories." "There's Morty," Maurice continued. And his tone told me what was coming would be worse. Brittany already put the house up for sale. She has an interested buyer willing to pay $800,000. The closing is scheduled for within a week. That can't be legal. Robert said she's arrested. She can't complete a real estate transaction from jail. She posted bail this morning, Morris informed us. $500,000. We don't know where she got the money, but she got out 3 hours ago. Ethan is still inside because his bail is higher, $1 million. And apparently they don't have access to that amount. "Where did Brittany get $500,000? I asked. "I thought they had frozen all accounts related to the case." Maurice exchanged a look with Robert before answering. "We believe she has an accomplice we haven't identified yet. Someone with significant resources who is helping her from the shadows. We are investigating, but so far we have no concrete evidence. The idea that there was someone else involved, someone who was still helping Brittany even after everything had been exposed, filled me with a fear I hadn't felt even during the trial. Because if there was someone else, someone with enough money and power to pay $500,000 bail without a second thought, then this was much bigger than we had imagined. "I need to get my house back," I said firmly. "They can't keep it." "Not after everything else." "We are already working on it," Morris assured me. We filed an emergency lawsuit this morning to nullify the property transfer based on forgery, but legal processes take time. And in the meantime, Brittany is technically the legal owner of the property. She can sell it before we manage to stop her. "Then we will stop her another way," Robert said, pulling out his phone. "If she wants to play dirty, we're gonna show her what playing dirty really is." I spent the next few hours listening to Robert make calls. He contacted judges, lawyers, private investigators, people whose power and influence were evident in the way they responded immediately to his requests. It was like watching a master in his element, moving pieces on a chessboard I could barely comprehend. That evening, Morris returned with a team of investigators. They had been following Brittany since she was released on bail, and what they discovered was worse than any of us had imagined. She went directly to her home, reported one of the investigators, a man named Frank, the same correctional officer who had made the initial call to Robert. But she wasn't alone. There was a man waiting for her. We identified him as Richard Reynolds, Tatiana's ex-husband. "Matthew's father, the man who abandoned his family?" Robert asked, his voice filled with disgust. "He's the accomplice." "It seems he never actually left," Frank explained. "We've been tracking his finances. He has an offshore account with over $3 million. Money he apparently earned in illegal businesses over the last 5 years. And it turns out he met Brittany 2 years ago, long before she married Ethan. She saw an opportunity in your family, seduced Ethan specifically to get close to your money." The room fell silent as we processed this information. Brittany had been planning this for years. She had met Richard, had seen an opportunity in my family, had seduced Ethan specifically to get close to my money. Everything had been calculated. Meticulous, malicious from the start. "Then Ethan was also a victim," I murmured, feeling a strange mixture of rage and pity for my son. "She used him from the beginning." "That doesn't excuse him," Robert said firmly. "He chose to go along with the plan. He chose to betray you. Victim or not, he has to pay for his actions." "There's more," Frank continued. "We overheard part of their conversation. Brittany and Richard are planning to flee the country. They have tickets bought for tomorrow night to Brazil. They plan to sell the house quickly, take the money, and disappear before the legal system can reach them." "Not if we stop them first," Robert said. "Frank, I need you to keep monitoring them. Every move, every call, every person they talk to. Morris, prepare a court order to block any sale of the property and contact immigration. I want their names on every watch list at every airport, every border. They are not leaving this country." The operation was put into motion with an efficiency that left me astonished. Robert had resources I had never imagined. People in key positions who owed him favors, who respected his name, who would act without asking why. Within hours, we had 24-hour surveillance on my house, court orders being processed, and alerts at every exit point in the country. But I wanted more. It wasn't enough to stop them legally. I needed to face them. I needed them to know I had discovered them. That their plan had failed again. That they were never going to win. "I want to go there," I told Robert that night. "To my house. I want to see it one last time before all this ends." Robert looked at me with concern. "It's dangerous. If Brittany knows you're there." "Let her know," I interrupted. "I want her to know. I want to look her in the eye and tell her exactly what I think of her, of everything she did, of how she destroyed my family." Robert sighed, but he understood. He knew that need for closure, for a final confrontation. Then we will go together, he said, but with complete security. I won't risk your life for a moment of satisfaction. Deal. We arrived at my house at dusk. The place that had been my home for 30 years looked different now, almost strange, as if it no longer belonged to me. The lights were on inside, and I could see shadows moving behind the curtains since. Brittany was inside, probably packing, preparing for her planned escape. Robert had insisted on bringing security. 2 cars with guards followed us at a safe distance. Frank was in one of them, monitoring every move. We had constant communication with Morris, who was ready to intervene legally at any moment. Are you sure about this? Robert asked once more as we approached the front door. We can still turn back. I'm sure, I replied, even though my heart was pounding so loudly I felt it might jump out of my chest. I used my key. The same one I had used for decades, wondering if Brittany had been careless enough not to change the locks. The door opened with a soft click. We entered the foyer, and the familiar scent of my home hit me with a wave of nostalgia so strong I had to stop for a moment to regain my composure. But something was wrong. Very wrong. The house was almost empty. The furniture I had bought so carefully over the years, the photographs on the walls, the memories of a lifetime, everything was gone. Only the largest pieces remained, the ones that would be difficult to move quickly. My God, I whispered, walking into the living room. They took everything of value. Robert squeezed my hand. His face hardened with rage. We continued on, passing through rooms that had been systematically emptied. My bedroom, where I had slept next to my late husband for years, was completely stripped. They had even taken the curtains. Voices came from the kitchen. One was definitely Brittany. The other was male, deep, probably Richard Reynolds. We approached quietly, staying out of sight as we listened. Are you sure the buyer is going to close tomorrow? Richard was asking. We can't risk this being delayed any longer. She confirmed this morning, Brittany replied, her voice full of satisfaction. $800,000 transferred directly to my offshore account. By this time tomorrow, we'll be on the plane with over $2 million between the house and what we took from the old woman's accounts before they froze them. And Ethan? Richard asked. Don't you think he's going to be a problem when he finds out you left without him? Brittany let out a cruel laugh that chilled my blood. Ethan was useful as long as I needed him, but he was too weak, too emotional. He almost ruined everything with his stupid guilt. No, it's better to leave him behind. Let him rot in prison thinking his wife abandoned him. It will be what he deserves for being so pathetic. I had heard enough. I walked into the kitchen with Robert right behind me. Brittany was standing by the table surrounded by boxes. Richard was on the other side, a large man with a hard expression who looked at me with surprise when we appeared. Hello, Brittany, I said, keeping my voice firm even though I was trembling inside. Interesting conversation. Britton's face transformed from surprise to terror in an instant. She dropped the box she was holding, its contents scattering across the floor. I recognized the objects, my antique jewelry box, framed photographs, small antiques I had collected over the years. How did you get in here? She demanded, partially regaining her composure. This is my house now. You are trespassing your house, I repeated, the words coming out bitterly based on forged documents and a corrupt notary. Did you really think you were going to get away with it? Richard took a step forward, his posture threatening. You should leave now before this gets ugly. Robert moved to partially block me, his voice cold as ice. I suggest you stay exactly where you are, Mr. Reynolds. We have security personnel surrounding this house, and they are all waiting for my signal. One wrong move, and this will end very badly for you. As if to emphasize the point, Frank appeared at the back kitchen door, followed by 2 security guards. Richard looked around, calculating his options, and apparently decided he had none. We also have your tickets to Brazil, I continued, taking out my phone and showing her the screen with the confirmation of their flights and your offshore accounts. The $3 million you thought no one could track. Everything is being frozen right now by court order. The color drained from Brittany's face. Her eyes moved frantically, looking for an exit that didn't exist. You can't prove any of this, she said weakly. They are just accusations without evidence. We have audio recordings of your conversation from 5 minutes ago, Robert said, where you admitted to stealing $2 million and planning to flee the country, where you admitted to using Ethan and planning to abandon him in prison. I think that counts as sufficient evidence. Furthermore, I added, feeling a dark satisfaction growing in my chest. Ramona Perry, the notary you bribed, has already confessed everything. She faced losing her license and possible prison, so she decided to cooperate fully. We have documents, bank transfers, text messages. Everything is documented. Brittany slumped into a chair, all her arrogance evaporating. For the first time since I met her, I saw her as she really was, a scared con artist who had finally been caught. Why? I asked, needing to understand. Why did you do all this? Was it really worth destroying a family, ruining lives? All for money? Brittany looked at me with empty eyes. Because people like you have everything effortlessly. Nice house, money saved, respect, while the rest of us have to fight for every penny. I saw an opportunity and I took it. That's all. No, I said firmly. I worked for everything I have. Years of sacrifice, saving every dollar, living modestly to have security in my old age. You just wanted to steal what you didn't earn. Sirens began to sound outside. Maurice had requested a police unit once we confirmed we had enough evidence for additional arrests. Officers entered moments later with updated arrest warrants for Brittany and a new one for Richard Inn on conspiracy and money laundering charges. As they handcuffed them, Brittany looked at me one last time. Ethan really hated you, you know? She spat out with venom. I didn't have to convince him of much. He wanted your money as much as I did. Her words hurt. But they no longer had the power to destroy me because I knew the truth now. My son had chosen this path, and he would have to live with the consequences. Goodbye, Brittany, I said as they took her out of my house. I hoped the money was worth it. When they were finally gone, I stood in my empty kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of my plundered life, and finally allowed the tears to flow. Robert hugged me, holding me as I cried for everything I had lost. For the family I would never have again, for the son I had loved and who was now lost forever. But I also cried with relief because it was finally over. The nightmare was finally over. 6 months later, I was standing in the garden of my completely restored house. Robert had insisted on hiring the best restorers, decorators, and artisans to return my home to its original glory. Every piece of furniture Brittany had stolen had been replaced by something even more beautiful. The walls had been repainted, the floors polished until they shone. It was as if the house had been purified of all the darkness that had occurred within it. But the most important thing was who was with me in that garden. Matthew was running between the flowers I had planted especially for him, his laughter filling the air with a music I didn't know how much I had needed to hear. Tatiana was sitting on a patio chair watching her son with a peaceful smile. She had finally found stability, a good job, and most importantly, she had completely removed Matthew from his father's toxic influence. Because Richard Reynolds was in prison, sentenced to 15 years for conspiracy, fraud, and money laundering. Brittany was serving 12 years in a federal prison. All her assets confiscated. All her accounts emptied to pay restitution. And Ethan, my son, was serving 8 years for his role in the conspiracy. The judge had been more lenient with Ethan than with the others. Recognizing that he had been manipulated to some extent by Brittany, but he still had to pay for his actions, for the signatures he forged, for the documents he knowingly presented as false, for betraying his own mother in the cruelest way possible. I had tried to visit him in prison once, 2 months after his conviction. I thought that maybe after everything that had happened, we could start some kind of healing process. But when I arrived at the visiting room and saw his face through the glass, all I found was bitterness and resentment. "You came to gloat," he had said through the visiting room phone, "to show me how well you're doing while I rot here. I came to see if there was still anything left of the son I raised." I replied calmly, "But I see there isn't." "That son died when you decided to marry your millionaire and keep it a secret," he spat. "If you had told me the truth from the start, none of this would have happened." "None of this would have happened if you hadn't decided to rob me and send me to prison," I corrected him. "You made those decisions, Ethan, no one else." He didn't respond. He just looked at me with pure hatred. And in that moment, I understood that there was no redemption here, no mutual forgiveness or reconciliation. My son was gone, replaced by this bitter stranger who blamed everyone but himself. I got up to leave, but before hanging up the phone, I said one last thing. "Despite everything, I wish you peace, Ethan. I hope one day you find a way to forgive yourself because I have already forgiven you. Not for you, but for me, to be able to move on with my life without carrying this weight." I didn't wait for his response. I just left. And I hadn't been back since. But today, in this garden full of life and light, with my grandson laughing and my new family around me, I finally felt that I had closed that painful chapter. Robert came out of the house carrying a tray with fresh lemonade and cookies we had baked together that morning. Grandma, look what I found!" Matthew shouted, running toward me with a ladybug in his small hand. "Can I keep it? Ladybugs need to be free, honey," I told him, kneeling down to his level. "But you can watch her for a moment and then let her go so she can return to her family." Matthew nodded seriously, studying the insect with fascination. Tatiana came closer and put her hand on my shoulder. "Thank you for everything you've done for us," she said softly. "Not just the financial support, although that has been incredible, but for giving Matthew a real grandmother, someone who loves him unconditionally." "The pleasure is entirely mine," I replied sincerely. "Matthew has given me a purpose I didn't know I needed." Robert sat next to me on the garden bench, putting his arm around my shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How strange life is. I said 6 months ago I was in a processing room, handcuffed, believing my life was over, and now I'm here surrounded by people who truly love me in a house that is truly mine with a future I never imagined possible, and with a husband who would do anything for you," Robert added with a smile. "Yes," I smiled back, "with a husband who moved heaven and earth to save me." Frank Miller, the correctional officer who had made all this possible, was also thriving. Robert had kept his promise. Frank and his family now lived in a beautiful house in Sun Valley Hills, completely paid off. His wife, Joan, had received the medical treatment she needed. His daughter, Livia, had gotten a good job at one of Robert's companies, and his grandchildren had their own room for the first time in their lives. Frank came to visit us occasionally, always shy, always grateful, still unable to fully believe that a simple act of kindness had transformed his life that way. "I just made a call," he always said. "You did more than that, Frank," I replied. "You gave me hope when I had none, and that is priceless." As the sun began to set over the garden, Matthew finally released his ladybug and ran to sit on my lap. Robert took my hand. Tatiana started preparing dinner in the kitchen, and for the first time in what seemed like decades, I felt something I had forgotten existed. Complete peace. It wasn't the ending I had imagined when I married Robert a year ago. It wasn't the family I had dreamed of having when Ethan was a baby in my arms, but it was my family now. A family built not by blood, but by choice, by kindness, by genuine love. And as I looked around this garden full of life, at this restored home, at these people who had chosen me as much as I had chosen them, I understood something fundamental. It is never too late to start over. It is never too late to find happiness. And it is never too late to learn that true family is not who shares your blood, but who chooses to stay by your side when everything falls apart. I am 70 years old. I have survived widowhood, betrayal, unjust incarceration, and the loss of my only son. But I have also found love again, met my grandson, and built a life worth living. And if there is one thing I have learned from all this, it is that women my age, women who have survived decades of life, who have faced loss and betrayal and pain, are stronger than anyone imagines. We deserve respect. We deserve dignity. And above all, we deserve justice. And when someone tries to take that away from us, we have every right to fight with every ounce of strength we have, because we are never too old to defend ourselves. We are never too weak to demand what is ours. And we are never, ever invisible, no matter how much the world tries to make us believe otherwise. This is my story, and it has a happy ending. Not because everything was resolved perfectly, but because I finally learned that I deserve to be happy. And that, perhaps, is the most important lesson of all. It is a brutal yet powerful thing to realize that blood relationship does not guarantee genuine connection, worth, or loyalty. It's a hard truth, especially for a parent. But accepting that a person's actions define their character, not their lineage, is the key to personal freedom. The greatest takeaway from this experience is the immense value of active self-advocacy. I had to speak up even when my voice was shaking to activate the network of protection I didn't even know I possessed. The moment I slipped that note to the officer, I transitioned from being a passive victim to an agent of my own rescue. It taught me that genuine family is an intentional construction forged in the fires of mutual respect, not merely inherited by chance. The act of forgiving, even when the offender is unrepentant, is solely for the benefit of the person offering it, a crucial step in releasing the emotional chains that bind you to past pain and building an empowered future. True recovery is about reclaiming your narrative, finding joy and purpose in unexpected new beginnings, and realizing that your life is defined by the quality of the relationships you choose to cultivate rather than the ones that abandoned you.